that some 540,000 customers were out of electricity at the end of the storm, the hurricane. The report we now have is that 158,000 customers are still out of electricity. So there's now 530,000 customers that are being served. The effect of the hurricane was that going into the hurricane, the natural gas unit that supplied natural gas had to go safe harbor. So that was disconnected on the 23rd of October, and it was out until I think the 31st. To assist JPS in preparation for the hurricane, we approved an advance of $5 million from the disaster fund. JPS reported to us, as we had discussed previously, that they had engaged arrangements with overseas linesmen to come in the event that they were necessary. And indeed, crews from the US and St. Vincent were mobilized. There are a lot of public advisories, which I won't get into the details on. But what is the situation today? I'm told that there is 790 megawatt of capacity available. And the peak is around 400, and the last peak since the hurricane would have been 467 megawatt. The renewables, there's 50 megawatt of capacity available. The 8 River facility was severely damaged and is not available to the system. The report we have is that some 58 of 80 transmission lines were damaged. Approximately 900 defects were identified, and 66% of HV damage concentrated in western parishes. So the destruction to transmission was unprecedented. And then there's the distribution system, again, severely damaged. And the details are there, so I won't repeat them. Now, there's a graph that has shown how the restoration has gone, that you can take a look at. But then JPS outlined to us 2 paths at a couple of weeks after the restoration effort started. Path 1, which would have seen restoration going until into May, and Path 2, where if they were able to mobilize additional resources, they would see restoration going into February. Thankfully, they have found a way to pursue Path 2, and therefore we're expecting that the restoration will be completed in February. There's a disaster fund that essentially is self-insurance that is presided over by the OUR. And there would have been claims after Beryl, so the fund would have been somewhat depleted. But going into the hurricane, there was essentially an available $50 million, considering outstanding Beryl claim as well. And up to date,
when you say considering, this is after the Beryl claim, that $50 million had to cover both?
No, that considering outstanding claims from Beryl, netting that out.
So you had $50 million.
$50 million, that was the
US dollars.
Right. We have to date given JPS authorization to take $45 million, essentially. So there is a $5 million that is kept in the fund for prudential reasons. So that is what has happened with the disaster fund. Now, JPS has also given us some commitments in terms of restoration, and we have shared those with you. The current situation, it is claimed, is that St. Catherine and KSA are 99% restored. The eastern parishes are The eastern parishes are on track for restoration by Christmas, and then there are targets for St. Anne for 80%, and western parishes, there's still not the kind of hard commitment on those that can allow us to be certain. But with the new facility that they have, we'd expect them to be able. I'm expecting that with track 2, they will be able to give us more firm commitments. And in fact, we have now actually, there is, if you see it, I'll refer you to the report that we provided on the electricity system recovery. On page 12, there is a detailed commitment in terms of parish by parish restoration. And so there are areas in Westmoreland, for example, and saying that they have committed
to
Hewitt.
Is that what the slide you're referring to that's on the screen?
No, this is not on this. It's
not on the slide
this is not on your
presentation.
slides. It's in the detailed report on the electricity sector. That provides you with the commitments that they have given that we certainly intend to hold them to. So that's about it for the electricity sector. And we expect as well that JPS will provide us will now be in a position to give us more details in terms of restoration of specific areas, because we have been pushing them to have those published so that for planning purposes as well. Now, there is clearly there has been a reluctance to do it initially because of the situation and the uncertainty about that. Now that we have got there's greater clarity on resources, it seems to me that the company ought to be in a position to be more definitive in terms of giving broad targets in terms of areas in which restoration will take place and what residents can expect. So we expect that they'll provide that information going forward.
Just complete your presentation to include NWC,
Okay.
and then we'll have out questions at the end.
So then, thanks, Chair. So the NWC reported to us that among the serious issues that they face was the storm would have been a hurricane, washout and structural failure of key transmission mains and distribution line, flooding and mechanical damage at major treatment facilities and pumping stations, stormwater intrusion, which overwhelmed the sewer network, resulting in sewer collapses, compromised access routes, impeding system recovery, high operational expenditure for emergency response, generators, fuel, and equipment rental. We have provided in the table, as we have from NWC, a kind of comparison between what the situation was on the 4th of November, which we consider for them operating on a normal condition, and what the situation is, or they said it is on the 1st of December. And you will see what has taken place in terms of restoration and rehabilitation. So, and again, we also have some details as to the restoration of critical facilities, which has to go on in tandem with JPS's restoration in instances where the NWC does not have alternative power supplies. Now, I want to highlight some regulatory challenges that may impede the progress for NWC's restoration. NWC has estimated the preliminary estimate of damage is essentially $10 billion, right? And that they need to spend $4.65 billion in the first 3 months. So they have gone 2 months already. And another $5.25 billion. They have requested, we have what is called the K factor, which really is a facility that is to deal with leakages primarily and energy efficiency to the NWC. That facility, NW is seeking to tap fund from it. Well, there are two ways it works. There is a charge that is applied to customer bills at the end of for each month, and that charge goes into the K-factor fund. NWC has asked that in light of the recovery costs, that we allow them to not put that portion into the K-factor fund over a 6-month period, I think it is. So that will help to fund some of the restoration. The K-factor has some over $5 billion in it, and Jamaican dollars, J dollars, yes. And NWC has asked for immediate access to $2 billion in that. So that's something that we're looking at, and I think we're disposed to say, because even though it does not fall within the K-factor arrangement, the fact is that if you can't supply water, then you cannot collect any money anyway. So
and the use of the K-factor is left to the discretion of the OUR?
Yes, the OUR, well, there are rules governing it, and the current rules say what it is to be used for, and to draw down on it, the NWC
But you
needs
can vary that, even though this is not within the rules. You, in other words, no law has to be changed.
No law has to be changed because we constructed the rules. We just need to be.
So it's an administrative.
It is an administrative decision, but we need to demonstrate that it is consistent with the principles, and or that there is great justification for this kind of exception.
So effectively, this is in a sense, the equivalent of the disaster fund that JPS has.
No, not.
But
well, in this case, they're asking it to be treated almost as the equivalent of the disaster.
Because there's no equivalent disaster.
There's no equivalent, for the NWC. Now, yes.
But how would that affect the drawdown from the existing funds and from future funds? How would that affect projects that are in line for those funding?
Right.
I guess it's a reprioritization.
Right. So you're spot on, Mr. Chairman. That
I'm a former chairman of the Water Commission, so I understand a little about K-factor.
It shows that. First of all, there's the issue of we have to make sure that there is whatever is spent out of the fund, that there is sufficient fund left to meet ongoing requirement, because some borrowing has been done against the K-factor. So hence, we would not be saying, look, you can tap all of the K-factor, because there are obligations that the K-factor has that has to be sustained. So that's one consideration. And the second, as the chair said, is that clearly, if you are going to use some of the existing funds to recover from the disaster, you're going to have to do some reprioritization, but including perhaps delays of projects. No. But again, there are all kinds of things that happen with this reconstruction. You may have gains and speeding up of projects as well, so it may not be a zero-sum game at all.
I just push through to the end of your presentation.
I'm sorry?
Just push through to the end of your presentation.
So the only other thing is that, clearly there is still going to be, even if you've tapped the K-factor, there's still going to be this gap, which we expect, of course, that the government will take up. Our view has been to the government that clearly NWC, it has to be treated as part of the disaster recovery plan, and therefore we'd expect the government as shareholder to fill whatever gap there is. I think that I can stop there. I'm sorry? Remember?
Yeah, so we will move now to questions, and as I did previously, use the chairman's prerogative to ask the first two questions. There was a report Your annual report was tabled in Parliament yesterday, Ministry Paper number 46, 2025. And it's relevant to this K factor and the use of the K factor fund. You reported that net revenue water averaged 31.8%. Now I know that we've spent billions on the K factor, from the K factor fund over the last couple of decades, trying to reduce the non-revenue water losses. We know that some of that is inevitable because of processed water and so on, but I had really anticipated that by now the net revenue water would have been higher than this. And just for members' comparison, 26% billed versus 74% classified as non-revenue water for the National Water Commission. But the private providers produce 3.6 million cubic meters and bill 2.8 cubic meters. So they have a much higher level of billable water. So it shows that it is achievable. And having spent billions over 2 decades, because the K factor was there from my time, should this 26% build be accepted? Maybe we should just, really look at how effectively this K factor is achieving what it was intended to achieve when it was instituted. That's one. The second question has to do with the JPS. You, again, with reference to your Ministry Paper 46, in 2024, you comment that unusually for May, so this was before burial, peak demand dropped by 2% to 678 megawatts. And I want to tie this back to what one senior manager at JPS described to me as a death spiral of the transmission and distribution grid, because the best commercial customers, or many of the best commercial customers, were setting up their own cogeneration facilities, gas-fired cogeneration facilities. Many of the best residential customers and smaller commercial customers were moving off the grid to solar, or substantially moving off the grid to solar. So the same overheads, particularly of the new generated plants, now had to be distributed across a smaller base, which means that the cost per kilowatt hour will continue to be very high. So that now impacts affordability at the lower end. So here you are getting squeezed from the top. You're losing your best residential and your best commercial customers who can afford to pursue alternatives, whether renewables or otherwise. And at the bottom, more people cannot afford to formally access JPS. So you're getting a squeeze from a top and the bottom. And so the company that has the transmission and distribution system is really getting the squeeze in the middle, because the generating companies are guaranteed their returns and they only have to plug into the grid, and they don't struggle with the distribution losses, etc. So I would want you to explain, particularly at that time when we're hearing that the government, if it is not repaid the loans, it will just have to step in and take over back the company. Now, will what is left of the JPS, outside of the independent private power producers, of which the major shareholders of JPS are one of those, would we be stepping in to take over a company that's commercially looking at a secular decline in their revenues because of this death spiral that I've described.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. I'm going to take the first question and I'm going to punt to our Deputy Director General in charge of electricity and water for the second. So just giving him notice on that. So on the first, I think you would have said that in comments in the annual report, I expressed my own disappointment with what has transpired with regard to NWC and the K factor. And I also did point out, however, that the bright light in that, the sign of hope in that is that KSA, the program undertaken in the KSA has reduced non-revenue water to somewhere around 40 in the mid 40s, coming down from 70%. So that's, we're hoping that becomes more of a template for what is to be done across the island, including a project that is currently on the way in St. Catherine, including the Portmore area. So yes, there has been the great disappointment that we haven't secured better figures in terms of non-revenue water. The part of the difficulty has been that because it is a network, you fix leaks in one place and it creates pressure in another. So until you get to a kind of, I don't want to use the optimal point in the network, until you get to a point in the network where you're fixing leaks don't actually just introduce pressure in other areas, it's going to be difficult to see the overall figure coming down. But I think the NWC is managing now to sectionalize its system better and to hopefully over the next few years we'll see some gainful reductions in non-revenue water.
So, and how is that non-revenue water divided between leaks and theft? Is there any estimate of that? Leaks, theft, and processed water.
There are estimates, but I'm not convinced that they're reliable.
That they're reliable. Okay. JPS, take response on.
Yes. Thank you. The question of the debt. Utility debt spiral is a fascinating concept, but I'm not too certain if at this stage of the game, if it is applicable to Jamaica. The fall in demand that you referred to last year, it was contrasting what happened before burial and what happened after burial. Before burial, the demand was pretty high, but after burial, it fell because two things. One, there was less demand as a result of the hurricane. And the second thing is we transitioned to cooler months. But the evidence is that there has been growth in the demand or the energy consumption from JPS actually. In fact, what has happened is that a couple years ago, we at the OUR indicated that we think that electricity would be growing by 1.6%. And JPS insisted that it would be growing by about 0.6%. And what happened is, after what came out post-COVID, they upped their growth, which was higher than ours, in fact. So there is a risk, I would say, but the evidence points to growth in electricity consumption. There are some people coming off the grid. There has been even one instance where one has come back, that I know of, a very large one has come back. But insofar as I'm concerned, we have to pay attention to keeping prices as low as possible. But at the same time, what seemed to be happening is that there has been growth in terms of
what's the average
electricity
growth per
consumption.
annum over the last 10 years or 5 years, whatever? Well, I know you said what were the projected growth and they've exceeded that. But I'm
Over the
just
last
asking, what's the
5 years, taking
average annual?
out what happened during COVID,
Oh,
there has been growth since about 2016. In fact, one of the reasons why JPS moved from a price cap to a revenue cap was because they had fears that electricity growth was going south or in the negative direction, so as to secure their income. But what actually happened after that was quite different. Electricity energy consumption has kept on growing. And as I said before, if we exempt the COVID period.
so, I mean, do you have an actual objective figure you could share with us? I hear you that there's been growth. If you say 2016, there was, how much 100 or whatever megawatts, however you measure it, of electricity consumed versus 2024 or 20, if you want to use a more normal year. What would those figures look like?
Well, I couldn't speak to the exact numbers, but we could provide it.
You could provide it. Well,
We could provide
okay.
it.
Yeah, say the last 10 years, and we'd be able to circle the anomalies for COVID or burial.
Yeah, sure.
I think Mrs. Hornes had signaled. I hope you note how